All right, so in this video today, we are going to be talking about triggers. Let's first define exactly what I mean in the simplest way possible. Basically, a trigger is an intense emotional reaction to a situation. Now, because we are here talking about triggers in marriage, we're going to constrain our conversation to talking about those things that your partner may say or do, or different interactions that you all may have that trigger an intense emotional response inside of you. Now, here's the thing about triggers. If you are able to really assess how you are feeling, you will notice in your body when you are actually triggered. And that is because triggers, situations, again, with those intense reactions, create a physiological response inside of you. And many times we respond to that in one of four ways. We either want to fight, we either freeze, we either fawn, or we flee. So I want you to think about when you have an intense emotional reaction to something your partner has said or done or an interaction, what is your typical response? Many times when I am working with my clients, they fall into the fight, meaning they criticize, they complain, they control, or the flee. They totally avoid connecting, they withdraw, they move away from their partner because it doesn't feel safe for them to do that. Now, here's the thing that you have to know about triggers. One of the biggest mistakes is to look at the other person as the cause and the reason you are feeling the way that you are feeling. Now, I know you probably don't want to hear that because in the moment when you are triggered, your brain is on a beeline to blaming your spouse, to looking at what they are doing wrong and why they are the cause of your anger, your frustration, your disappointment, your sadness, your loneliness, whatever emotion that you are feeling. But here's the reason why you want to stop doing that. When your focus is only on what is outside of you, when your focus is only on what your spouse said, what your spouse did, what they didn't say, what they didn't do, you then become dependent on them changing in order for you to feel better. Now, I want you to think about that. If you find yourself very triggered when your spouse isn't prioritizing spending time with you, and you feel like you are lonely and that you're in this marriage by yourself, if the only focus in your mind and attention is on how they need to change, what they need to do so that you can feel connected, then you miss the power that you have. You also miss the insight that a trigger is designed to offer you. That's right. There is valuable information inside every trigger moment that you have that will help you understand yourself more deeply, have a greater level of self-awareness, which then opens the door for real, deep, and lasting healing. So let me break it down. A trigger is something that is showing you a part of yourself that is needing your attention. And I want you to start looking at triggers as, oh, this is an invitation to go inside. It's an invitation to ask myself, what is causing me to feel this way? Now, an important part about triggers is that oftentimes when we are highly triggered, that fight response, that flee response, it is often in a larger proportion to the actual situation that happened. meaning we have what I call an overreaction. I don't mean an overreaction in that it is, should be dismissed and your feelings don't matter. What I mean is that your reaction, the intensity with which you feel offended or hurt or angry, is far greater than the actual thing that happened. So, if your partner is scrolling on social media or is distracted when you were trying to have a conversation with them, if you find yourself totally blowing off the handle or totally shutting down and not wanting to speak to them for the rest of the night, that is an intense and overreaction to, maybe in another instance, it might be some inconsideration that you could calmly say, hey, put your phone down. I would like your undivided attention right now. Okay? So, when we have an intense overreaction to a situation, it is usually because of three specific things. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down for you the three parts of your trigger that you want to, in that time when you're going inward, really investigate and really understand what is going on for you. The first part of your trigger has a historical context. That means that when you are having an intense reaction to an interaction with your spouse, there is some root to that often stems from your childhood. So, when you are feeling that intense emotion, what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, when else did I feel this way? When in my childhood was this an emotion that was very familiar to me? When in my childhood did I have a similar situation and a similar reaction that wasn't handled well by my caregivers? So you really want to begin to ask yourself, like, where does this come from? Why is this so bothersome to me specifically? What in my past, what in my upbringing, what incidents did I have where I felt the same way, and the opportunity to soothe and resolve and healthfully address the way that I was feeling was missed? Because what happens is when an emotional need isn't met all the way back in childhood, we carry it with us. It becomes like the fabric within us that then when we are interacting with others, usually our spouse, in our present day situation, it hits us even more deeply. So the first part of your trigger you want to understand is, what is the childhood root? Where did this come from for me? The second part that you want to do and understand is, what's real versus what is my biased perception? So again, when we have a wounding from childhood and an unmet need, we begin to see our interactions with other people with a biased lens. So if we weren't prioritized as a child, we then become to expect that others aren't going to prioritize us. And so we have like this extra antenna that is always noticing, always perceiving, always experiencing ourselves as not being prioritized. And so you want to look at the current situation, the current interaction that you are having with your spouse, and ask yourself, what part of this is real versus what part of this is my biased perspective, the sort of like lens that I'm seeing this through because of my wounding, because of my orientation to feel a certain way in relationships. And then the third part of your trigger is the actual gap, meaning the miss in expectation. It is the gap between what you wanted and needed versus what your partner actually offered you. And usually what I find is, once you've looked at the childhood root, and then once you've assessed what's accurate versus what's my biased perspective, the actual gap in need and expectation in the current moment situation is usually much smaller. And then what that does for you is it turns down the intensity of that trigger. It turns down the emotional heat that you are feeling, because now something that seemed so big and so problematic that your spouse was doing, you have the proper context to evaluate and to look at what is going on. And so then when you are looking at this issue, that all of a sudden has gotten a lot smaller, a lot more manageable, then when you go to have a conversation with your partner, it's a completely different situation. You are much more grounded. You are much calmer. You're not ready to fight. You're not ready to flee. You're ready to express your feelings in a way that honors what is real for you, and also gives your partner the benefit of the doubt, because you've already investigated, am I being biased here? What are they really doing? What has really happened? So, in summary, when you find yourself triggered, when you have that intense emotional reaction to something your partner has done or said, or an interaction between the two of you, instead of blaming them, criticizing them, trying to let them know how wrong they are, I want you to take a private moment with yourself. I want you to go inside and look at what's really going on here. Where did this come from? What's real? What's my biased perspective? And then identify the accurate, real, and true gap, and then have the conversation. This moment of pausing and going inward will help you communicate your needs, make your requests, set whatever boundaries need to be set in a way that is much more grounded, in a way that is much more respectful, in a way that allows you to be heard. I would love to know how this works for you. So leave a comment and let me know. Let me know how you are using this to navigate and manage your triggers. And for more on this topic, for more on triggers in marriage and how to keep yourself calm, how to address the things that bother you, I invite you to tune into my podcast, Love Marriage Again with Dr. Chavonne. I have several episodes on managing triggers. I will link them in the comments here, and I would love for you to listen to the podcast, have that additional insight, additional in-depth analysis to give you even more tools to manage your triggers in a productive way that ultimately leads you to be closer with your partner instead of farther apart.